reported to jury duty and to Judge Camille Burris' court to participate in this particular case, the 16 who were selected, the 12 jurors and 4 alternates, I'm sure they had no idea what they were getting into, that they were going to be sitting in a hotel room and in the courtroom for 7 days, a trial that ended late last night, as you all know. I certainly appreciate the effort that they gave. I believe it certainly takes a very special person to get involved in the criminal justice system and serve as a juror. Those 16 individuals are very special people. I appreciate the deliberation, I appreciate the consideration, I appreciate the effort that they gave to this community and to the criminal justice system. As a result of their effort, I think they demonstrate that the criminal justice system works. I certainly appreciate, as I said, their attentiveness throughout the trial. I did have an opportunity to observe them on several occasions, and I felt that they were very attentive throughout the trial, and they displayed a great deal of patience, and as I said, I want to thank them for their involvement. I also want to thank the judge who presided over the case, Judge Camille Burris, as she initially was able to get this jury selected in one day. That's a very, very tall task and something I think she should be commended for. It's a very difficult case, especially when you're talking about sequestering a jury to get those individuals to agree to stay with us. Many times people can come up with excuses in order to get out of jury duty, but as I say, the judge conducted herself in a very professional and appropriate way in order to get this trial moving and keep the trial moving. I think, as many of you may have also observed, during the proceeding there was a great deal of tension, not only in the courtroom, but in the halls of the criminal court and even outside of the building of the criminal district court, when witnesses and family members had to go back and forth from our office to the courtroom. On several occasions they were certainly harassed. There was a tension that took place in the courtroom, and the judge was able to maintain order and decorum so that the case could be presented not only by us but by the defense also, so that the jury had an opportunity without any distractions to decide the case based on the evidence and based on the testimony of the witnesses. So the judge should be commended for that, and I thank her for that effort. I also want to thank the members of the New Orleans Police Department for the effort they gave in working this case, for the investigation that they conducted, for the gathering of the evidence, for the testing of the evidence. There were a number of witnesses that were called throughout this proceeding, and the police did a very, very good job of putting this matter together, and I appreciate them for the effort that they gave. I also want to thank the New Orleans Saints and Mr. Tom Benson. As we all know, Will Smith, the victim in this case, was a member of that team and a very well-respected member of the New Orleans Saints. Throughout the proceeding, we saw coaches, we saw players, we saw former players, we saw the wives of the players. In many cases, when the players couldn't make it to court, their wives were in court, affording support to Raquel Smith. That was extremely important. My heart goes out. I have a newfound love, having been in New Orleans my entire life, having seen the Saints the very first day they had played their first football game in Tulane Stadium. I have a greater appreciation and a greater respect for them. They showed a commitment to this community, a commitment to stand by one of their own and to support a person who absolutely needed the help and support, the comfort and the strength that they gave to her. I appreciate all of the players who came into the courtroom. I know on their off day, I understand they're off on Tuesday. Several of the present players came into court to watch the proceedings that took place. We have a great deal of respect and appreciation for them. I think you also know that after the game, the coach, Sean Payton, got off of the airplane, a plane ride from Tampa to New Orleans, got in a car and came to the criminal court to be present for the rendition of the verdict. Deuce McAllister did the same thing. That means a lot. I know it meant a lot to Raquel. It means a lot to us to show these lawyers that there were people behind them in the community who were supporting them and supporting what we did, and we're very appreciative and thankful for that. And finally, I want to thank the assistants. I want to thank Jason, I want to thank Laura, and I want to thank Tiffany. They worked extremely hard on this case from its very inception. They put in tireless hours. They put in countless days continuing to try to put this matter together. This was a very difficult case. Throughout this proceeding, the office was maligned, the police investigation was attacked, and it was necessary for them to sort of stand firm, work through this case, and try to bring the very best case that they could to the criminal district court. They did that for the past 7 days. I'm extremely proud of each and every one of them. I'm proud of the effort they gave, and this is just an example of the lawyers that we have working in our office. Young people who come in here and basically do it and sacrifice. I think it's important that you know that was the Cardell Hayes case was one of 3 murder cases that took place in the Orleans Parish Criminal District Court last week. We're starting another one today in the Criminal District Court also. So this is something that we do on a very, very frequent basis. And these men and women sacrifice of themselves. The case is now over. The Cardell Hayes case is over but for the sentencing, and they will now begin to work on the next case and the next homicide or the next sexual assault or the next armed robbery that they feel an obligation, that we feel an obligation to this community to work toward. So I appreciate very, very much the effort that they gave and the commitment. It was a very, very long and hard 7 days. We're satisfied with the result that we received, and I think it's because of their efforts, their combined efforts, that we were successful in this proceeding. I'm going to answer any questions that you may have, but I first of all would like to turn it over to Peter Thompson. Mr. Thompson would like him to make a statement on behalf of Raquel Smith.
Can you slide the next one, please?
Which one?
All of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Cannizzaro. On behalf of Raquel Smith and her entire family, we first want to thank the district attorney and his outstanding trial team. Their dedication to presenting the facts clearly and concisely was very much appreciated by Ms. Smith and her family. Possibly even more than that. Raquel and her family deeply appreciate the care and the compassion that the district attorney and his staff and all the ADAs and members of his staff that worked on this case, that they displayed to Raquel and her family during this entire process. It meant a lot. They took the time to learn about Will, to learn about his life, his relationship with Raquel, and what he meant to Raquel and to his children and Raquel's children. Mr. Hayes, he made the choice that night to resort to violence and to take a life. We are grateful to the jury in this case that after sorting through all the facts, they realized what the truth was in the end. That said, it's unfortunate, and Raquel wanted me to be clear to make this point, that although Mr. Hayes does now stand convicted of this crime, it's very unfortunate that another child will grow up without a father. But Mr. Hayes, regardless of that, must face the consequences for his actions under our system of laws. Raquel is still dealing with her loss, with this horrible tragedy. She shares everyone's feelings that this has been a tragedy for everyone involved. It's been a very, very tough week for Raquel and her family. And even though this verdict does not bring back Will, I think all of you, everyone can join me and all of us in praying that this at least might bring a little peace now to her and her family.
We're going
Thank
to take
you.
some questions while
Wait one second.
organizing the microphones back. Remember, I ask everybody just direct the questions to the table. We'll give you them up as needed.
One second, Chris. I did before. Peter, I appreciate that statement, and I did want to say that certainly Raquel Smith deserves a great deal of credit. From the very first day that we met her, and we had an opportunity to meet with her right here in this room, and we talked about this case, and we talked about how difficult this journey would be. She had absolutely committed herself to working with us, to doing anything that we needed from her. She would be here. Many times during these sorts of prosecutions, sometimes family members get distraught, they get deterred, they sometimes they develop a despair with regard to the entire system, and they do not want to participate and stay involved. She stayed involved, she was engaged, even though she had to sit in that court and she had to listen to reports about disparaging statements about her husband, disparaging statements about the investigation. She worked with us, and I am very, very appreciative. You know, she didn't know us. She didn't know any of these people when she first walked into this office to meet with us. I believe now we have a friend in Raquel Smith, and we're very thankful and grateful for her and the assistance and support that she provided to us throughout this proceeding. All right,
Megan?
thank you.
Did you feel the verdict was appropriate?
Yes, ma'am. I believe, as I said, I believe the jury worked very, very hard to do what they thought was the appropriate thing in that case. Certainly, we pursued it as a second-degree murder because we thought the facts supported a second-degree murder. But I can certainly understand in the jury's returning the verdict of manslaughter and attempted manslaughter, I can certainly understand the things that we had to overcome in this particular case that could have caused them some difficulties and therefore reducing the case from the second degree to the manslaughter. As you know, initially there was the allegation that Mr. Smith was involved in a hit-and-run accident with the Cordell Hayes vehicle. We also know that after Cordell Hayes crashed into the back of the Smith vehicle, there was testimony that Will Smith did get out of the vehicle in an aggressive fashion, and we also know that Mr. Smith had a blood alcohol content that was over the legal limit. So considering all of the factors and the hurdles that we had to overcome throughout the proceeding, and certainly considering the effort that the jury gave with regard to that case, I'm certainly very satisfied, and we accept the verdict of the jury.
Ken?
Mr. Kinzer, you watched Mr. Baker in the closing arguments as defense attorney, John Fuller, spent a great deal of time integrating your office's tactics, and actually accusing your trial attorneys here of cheating during the trial. I just wonder what your responses are on that.
Well, you know, Ken, it's unfortunately what some of these assistants, some of these lawyers have to deal with on a pretty frequent basis. The young men and women who work in this office, I know they are skilled, I know they are intelligent, I know they are competent, but there's also another quality that I think they have to possess, and that is they have to be tough. They have to have thick skin, and they can't sort of wilt or melt when they hear allegations of that sort presented against them, especially during the course of this proceeding when, as you saw, many of these allegations were actually disproved and demonstrated to be false. So certainly it didn't deter them. You have to have, as I said, sort of a thick skin to work through that, to continue and not let it deter you or affect your ability to present the evidence and present the facts that have been submitted to you.
During the closing argument in the course of the trial, you guys touched on the fact that there were a lot of inconsistencies with people's statements, including some of your own witnesses. Did you ever question any of their statements they were giving you, and how did that factor into the trial? The fact that there were some inconsistencies in a lot of the statements that people gave despite the verdict.
Go ahead, Laura, you want to answer?
I think that we addressed to the jury that the inconsistencies that we found that people were giving were pretty common for several different people in a particular area viewing one traumatic event. So we explained to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury as we were selecting the jury, an example would be if you had 10 people witness a car crash. They may each give a different account based on what they were honing in on, essentially what seemed to stick out to them. But we said at the end of the day, they would all be able to tell you that an actual car accident had happened. That's similar to what we were seeing here. There were different people standing at different angles who had different perspectives as to what they were viewing when these passengers exited their vehicles. There was not anything that we found to be extremely odd or really stand out among the testimony of the witnesses, whether it was lay witnesses or whether it was members of Will Smith's vehicle or even Cardell Hayes' vehicle. We found that most of our lay witnesses were saying essentially the same thing. Some of them were hearing different words or hearing different phrases spoken by different persons, but they were describing the same physical actions of the people who exited. That was very important for us because they were all consistent in saying that Will Smith was walking away with Raquel. The incident on the side of as far as the passengers in the Mercedes goes, seems to have been diffused. That was very important for us to show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that whatever aggressive action that they perceived Will Smith had initially taken was over at that point.
Mark?
The New Orleans Saints are a central piece of the fabric of this city and this culture, and their presence in the courtroom, as you say, was extremely evident. Drew Brees, Sean Payton, Deuce McAllister is the first character witness. That was very supportive, you said, toward Raquel Smith. What kind of impact do you think it had on the jury?
Well, I think it demonstrated to the jury that this community stood behind Will Smith. This was about they took a hero. I mean, this was a murder of a hero. When you think about Will Smith, this is a man born in Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn, New York, goes and plays football at Ohio State University, drafted by the Saints, helps the Saints win their first and only Super Bowl, a franchise that had struggled. This man is all pro, retires, and yet doesn't want to go back to maybe Ohio where he went to school, doesn't want to go back to his home state of New York, but decides to stay in the city of New Orleans with his wife and his children and raise his family and try to enjoy and participate in things that we in New Orleans maybe sometimes take for granted, like our music, our culture, our food, our people, trying to basically enjoy himself. And what happens? He gets gunned down over a road rage incident. And the New Orleans Saints, by being in that courtroom, by demonstrating, even Steve Gleason came in there on several occasions in the wheelchair with his wife and the attendant, because he felt that this had affected our community and our city more than anything else. And they wanted to demonstrate a support. And let the jury know that. Let the jury know you're deciding the case here of someone who is a hero, someone who has made a significant contribution to this city, even after the football career was over. So I certainly think their presence was very much felt in the jury. And I want to say, even when we met with them when we come back to the office in the evening, those men, and as well as their wives, their family, they were here, and they were again always offering support, always offering encouragement to keep these lawyers. You're doing a good job. We're happy. We're proud of you. Patting them on the back, keeping them going, because a trial for 7 days gets very difficult and it gets wearing on them. But I think the support that they afforded us helped us, kept that adrenaline going, and kept us moving forward.
John?
Judge, the defense made a big issue of what they called a rush to judgment in this case and the swiftness of the indictment coming in 18 days. Can you talk about why you decided to go to the grand jury and secure an indictment in that short amount of time?
John, as you well know, and you covered it, as did many of the television stations covered it, from the very beginning of this homicide, from the night Will Smith was murdered, almost the very next day, his lawyer got up on TV and to the press and started saying, there's a conspiracy, they're hiding evidence, this was all done in self-defense, my guy is innocent. And I think you also know from being in this building, for a preliminary hearing to be held in a murder case in 18 days, which is what they set the preliminary hearing for, is unheard of. It just doesn't happen that quickly. So what we basically did was, the homicide detectives didn't have their police reports completed. None of the scene officers had their supplemental or final reports completed. So basically what we did was, we said, I'm not interested in putting witnesses on the stand who haven't necessarily completed their interviews, haven't necessarily gathered all of the witnesses, haven't conducted or concluded the investigation. I wasn't interested in the witnesses taking the stand at the preliminary hearing and saying things that would then be a minor inconsistency that would then be expanded and exaggerated at the trial in the presence of the jury, and then say, well, you see, these witnesses were lying. Essentially what we did was, we had a charge conference with the detectives, the people responsible. We were able to gather memos. We had enough information from the detectives. Once we sat down with our lawyers, we were able to present the matter to the grand jury and prevent them from obtaining a preliminary hearing.
Paul?
Mr. Cannizzaro, could you speak a little to the topic of what this verdict says in the context of the violence that we see on the streets of the New Orleans area every day? And are you hoping that this sends a message out there to people that if they're going to get violent, if they're going to get pull guns on the street, that they're going to be held accountable?
You know, Paul, that's a very, very tough question. I'd like to think at looking at what we have done, you know, sometimes this office has been criticized for taking too many cases. We take something like 95% of the murder cases that the police bring us. We accept them for prosecution. We get convictions in about 95% of those cases. You look at the gang indictments that we have successfully obtained, the gang convictions that we have obtained, approximately 100 people, considering the federal and the state prosecutions, people that have gone to jail for that. You look at we've had 3 shootings on Bourbon Street, 2 of them with mass crowds. 2 of them have been convicted of shootings on Bourbon Street. 2 more are in jail awaiting disposition on homicide cases. I'm not sure necessarily that we're sending a clear message by convicting people. What we are doing is we're getting the violent offender off the street so that he cannot go out and shoot or kill someone else again. I think we find in New Orleans that many of the people who are responsible for homicides are responsible for multiple homicides. So it is incumbent and imperative upon us to not only apprehend them, but convict them and essentially take them out of circulation so they're not able to hurt anyone else again. That is what our hope is going to be with regard to Cardell Hayes. He will not be able to ever hurt anyone ever again for the rest of his life. Now, is that going to be a deterrent to someone out on the street? I'm not so sure it is. Quite frankly, we have too many illegal guns on the street, and that's a part of our problem.
Could any of you discuss the sentencing parameters now that we have the conviction on the 2 counts, and then what you all might be asking for or recommending in the way of the sentence?
The minimum sentence that the judge must impose is 20 years. We have filed a firearm enhancement provision where death results. So under the manslaughter provision, the minimum sentence she must impose is 20 years. The maximum sentence for manslaughter is 40 years. The maximum sentence for attempted manslaughter is 20 years. The judge has the discretion to impose a sentence of up to 60 years. On February 17th at the sentencing hearing, we will present victim impact. We will put witnesses on to stand to talk about how they have been affected, adversely affected, how their lives have been changed drastically because of the death of Will Smith. We will ask the judge, we will do our ut-level best to get the judge to impose the maximum sentence of 60 years. It is my belief that this particular perpetrator is deserving of the 60-year sentence.
Paul, if anyone at the table, because it was somewhat unclear to us because we didn't get a chance to see the diagram, but could you explain exactly the positioning of Mr. Hayes, Mr. Smith, and the other incident involving Kevin O'Neill and Richard Hernandez? Could you place them on the scene for us and tell us exactly where they were positioned on the scene?
Jason?
Sure. I mean, that's one thing that was consistent with several witnesses, and the one inconsistency you had was with Cardell Hayes, and part of that is the crime scene diagram. All the witnesses essentially described two separate confrontations. On the driver's side of the vehicle, you have the confrontation between Will Smith and Cardell Hayes. On the passenger side of the vehicle is where you have the confrontation between Kevin O'Neill and the two white gentlemen, one from the Mercedes and the other gentleman from the Impala. So, I mean, the positioning of the individuals wasn't really through the crime scene diagram. That was done through multiple witnesses who all described two separate confrontations. The big problem with Cardell Hayes' testimony is that he essentially contradicted all of those witnesses. And in addition to that, on the crime scene diagram, you can make out the casings in the case. And what the casings demonstrated is essentially that Cardell Hayes pursued Will Smith as he was walking away, walked right up on him, and continued to fire shots into his back at such a close range that we ended up with casings inside of Will Smith's vehicle. And once again, when Mr. Hayes takes the witness stand, he completely contradicts all of that as well.
Drivers, if you could address this, you addressed the saints and the celebrity, but John Fuller levied some allegations that this case was all about celebrity. He even brought it up several times in his close that if the roles were reversed, we wouldn't be here right now. Did celebrity play a role in this case?
I refer you to Darren Sharper. Is that the one? I can simply say that, look, if you violate the law, I don't care who you are, we're going to pursue you. We're going to look at the case. If you're the victim and we have a case, we're going to pursue that case. The celebrity status had absolutely nothing to do, and I think Laura made a point of that in the argument last night. She talked about a victim that she represented a few weeks ago, a prostitute who was a victim of a rape, and no one was in that court to support her. But yet we took that case and we proceeded to trial with that case. This office is going to take very, very seriously violent crime. We are about public safety, and I believe that whoever is a victim, we are going to pursue that case. And if a person is a perpetrator and we believe he should be charged, we're going to pursue that charge.
Ken, trial attorneys, there were a lot of ups and downs throughout this trial. Is there any one key moment, key witness you can turn to tide in your favor?
I'll let each of them. Laura, you go first, and Jason.
I think we probably each have a different witness who we feel was key in this case. I mean, I'd agree that there were times when, in any trial, you're going to go up and you're going to go down, and you know that going in. I think that when we started calling the experts, when we started getting into the ballistics and to the coroner, it really corroborated all of our witnesses. And in addition to that, when we compared that to the story that Cardell Hayes was giving, it was just simply impossible. It wasn't a matter of do you believe this witness or this witness. It's are you willing to ignore science, basic math, to endorse the story of Cardell Hayes. And luckily we had a jury that was smart enough not to do that.
Laura?
I think we knew going in, and the three of us spent, this is sort of the glamorous part of it, but what's not so glamorous is the days and days and days that we have spent in this office, the late nights that we've been here after the jury has gone home. We knew what the witnesses were essentially going to say. We had recorded statements from them, and we knew we had to sort of get through all of those witnesses in the beginning part of our case. We knew there would be ups and downs. Some of them were seeing different things in the sense that we had spoken about earlier. Some of them were hearing different things. We knew the jury was going to sort of wrestle with the idea that different people are hearing different things, and what do we make of this? So we had been anticipating that would be sort of, the trial was going to be a marathon. We knew people were going to sort of think, oh no, what's going on the first couple of days as the witnesses, the lay witnesses were coming in one at a time. The unbiased witnesses were very important to us. We appreciate them. so much. They come, they don't ask for this, they don't ask to get involved, and yet they were willing to meet with us, not once, not twice, but most of them 3 times. We kept bringing them in over and over, going back to the crime scene diagrams, show us again where you were, show us again what you saw. So we sort of knew we were piecing together the puzzle as the jury was, and hoping that after we had spent months piecing it together, that we would be able to deliver that message in a coherent way, since we were only going to be able to tell them the story one time and for the first time. So we had to sort of get through those first days and all those witnesses, knowing what their perspectives were going to be when they testified, and we were very eager to get to the experts. I think we were also benefited a lot from the defense case. That was a break we did not expect to get. We certainly appreciated that we had prepared several of the witnesses. For those of you who were in there, we had sought out as many defense witnesses as we had anticipated might be called. We went to all of those magazines, GQ, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, all of the interviews, to seek out the people who were speaking out on behalf of Cardell Hayes. We tried to get a hold of them, tried to talk to them, anticipate what they might testify to if they were called. And some of you who were in court saw that. When they took the stand, we had already met with them. It was important for us to anticipate the defense before they came into court. We got extra breaks. Some of the defense witnesses we didn't expect to call, yet we knew what they would say if they were to be called. That's why I think we saw Mr. Napoli do such an effective cross-examination with Mr. Olasky, because we knew exactly what would happen if he took the stand. And I don't think maybe the defense had not anticipated that we had sort of covered that base ahead of time. We were very eager to start this trial. We sort of went in there knowing we were ready to go. We knew we were maybe not going to be as stylish or as articulate sometimes as the defense, but we knew if we kept going one day at a time that we had put the work in, and we were hoping that the jury would see that ultimately at the end of the day.
Ron? The defense team, Laura, your closing, you sort of for the first time explicitly stated, I think, that Will Smith was headed back to his car. It was just that he was headed back after he'd been shot by Cardell Hayes. Can you talk about, and that would explain the, perhaps, maybe then you can say the glove box being open. Can you say what you think happened? Did he shoot, realize he didn't hurt Will Smith badly enough, and then realizes, uh-oh, this guy's going back, and so I got to finish the job? I mean, can you describe what you think happened out there?
You know, like I said, we were in the office many, many, many days and nights going through the physical evidence, and we simply did not have a witness who was able to tell us what was going on in Will Smith's mind at the time that he goes into the car. We believe, based on the science and the physical evidence that we saw, that bullet, the shot that he takes to the left side of his body where he is horizontal, we know, technically speaking, has to be the first shot, because everything else he has fallen over, which is why we see that sharp up trajectory in the other shots that go into his body. So knowing we're looking at the first shot being on his left side while he's standing up, we know his back has to be to the open door of the car. Raquel takes the right shot, the first shot to her right leg, and all witnesses sort of see her collapse immediately. We know that there are 2 shots fired, a pause, and then the remainder of the shots. So at that point, we also know that Raquel and Will get hit in those first 2, and then Will takes the rest of them to the back once he has fallen in the car. He has to have fallen in the car by the time the second round of shots start because of the angle of the shots. Now, it was impossible for us to know, and I believe the testimony sort of came out, whether that glove box had fallen open at the time of the accident or whether it was open. In our opinion, it was hard to tell whether he would have had the opportunity to actually open the glove box. If you look closely at the photos, his hand doesn't even make it to the latch of the glove box or to that distance. We could never have said, though, that he would not have been trying to go in to get a gun, because logically he should have been at that point. He has taken a bullet, his wife has taken a bullet, he knows there's a gun in the car that he has placed in there. Once he cannot bring the gun into French Quarter Fest, it would make perfect sense that he goes in the car with every effort to try to get a gun before he is murdered. We know he doesn't ever make it to the car to get the gun. That's sort of corroborated by Kevin O'Neill's testimony, because Kevin O'Neill does the exact same thing. When he hears the shots, he goes straight to his car to get his gun. We found that that made sense. It was a reaction we would have expected. He sees his wife collapse. He's hit. He's not hit in a fatal way by that bullet to the left side. He would have been able to make it to the car, but we know once the shots start pumping in his back, he becomes paralyzed from the waist down, is what the coroner says. Based on the forensics, we believe the last shot is the highest one on his back that travels out of his shoulder and hits into the passenger front door of the Mercedes. We know he's in close proximity at that time. The casing falls into the Mercedes and one falls underneath the Mercedes.
Mark? After the verdict came in, Mr. Cannizzaro, you termed it a victory for the Smith family and a victory for the city of New Orleans. Moments after that, Deuce McAllister was outside and actually used the word, "This is not a win for anybody." Raquel Smith is going to go home and her husband's not going to be there, her children are going to go home and their father's not going to be there. For any of you, is this truly a victory?
I think Deuce McAllister, certainly his statement is accurate. Look, whenever we have a homicide, and what we experience in this city far too often is, if we are successful in convicting the person responsible, then for all intents and purposes, his life is over and he is taken away from his family forever. And that certainly is a loss to them. And we certainly know that the family member of the deceased certainly will suffer. They will never have an opportunity to go and visit with their family member ever again. So from that perspective, he is correct that it is a loss. It is a loss for the family members of the victim. It is a loss for the defendant and his family. But from our perspective, we look at it, again, in trying to ensure that someone like Cardell Hayes or anyone who goes out and commits a murder is not in a position to do this again. So from that perspective, the perspective of public safety, of trying to make New Orleans safer, a better place, it is a win. It's a very, very successful win for us. And you're right, from the perspective of Raquel Smith, she is never going to be the same. I understand that. But she now has a very difficult journey for the rest of her life, and maybe this helps just a little bit for her to get by for the next day or the day after, because she knows that the man responsible for taking her husband away from her and her family forever will never be able to do that again. So from that perspective, it is a win for us. But certainly his words were correct. I cannot disagree with that. And it's just a different perspective. Certainly from our point of view, we realize both aspects of this sort of a verdict. And again, it's our responsibility to see to it that someone like Cardell Hayes, if we believed, as we do, that he was responsible, that he not do this to anyone else.
Sarah?
Mr. District Attorney, you spoke briefly earlier about what factors may have gone into the jury's decision to opt for manslaughter instead of second-degree murder. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit upon that, or maybe if the trial team as well.
The manslaughter involves a provocation. Someone has to be reasonably provoked into doing the killing. It's essentially the same elements as second-degree murder. Second-degree murder involves the killing of a human being when you intend to kill him. So does manslaughter, except at the time of the killing, you are provoked, and a reasonable person would have been provoked under similar circumstances. From our perspective, as I think Laura and Jason have elaborated upon, we believe the conflict between Cardell Hayes and Will Smith was over when Mrs. Smith, when Raquel tells him, "We have children, let's don't get involved," and Will Smith starts to walk back to the car. From our perspective, we would think that a reasonable person would say, it's not necessary to use my gun. The event is over. But again, I can understand how the jury can say that because of the totality of the circumstances, I can see how they can look at this as a manslaughter. But our initial thinking was, This was a cold-blooded killing, and we thought that as a second-degree murder, we should present it. We presented it to the grand jury. They agreed with that analysis by returning the indictment of second-degree murder, and we presented it to the jury, and they saw it a little differently.
Can we talk about closing arguments? This question is kind of twofold. One, John Fuller's close was 4 hours, and I don't know if you guys noticed, it appeared some jurors may have been nodding off or falling asleep, if you could address that. And then your close, a lot of legal analysts last night thought that it was one of the things that may have sold this conviction to a jury.
Go ahead. You want to answer that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, John's close was very difficult to get through, and a lot of it was kind of confusing because he kept talking about how we were distracting from the case. Yet he took 2 hours to talk about how we were distracting from the facts. It got to a point where it almost felt like a filibuster. Like he felt like if he could drag this on for 4 hours, perhaps he could get to the late night hours, perhaps he could get them sent back to the hotel, and then who knows what happens when they come back the next day. But as far as closing arguments go, we really just had a very strong case. And my job during my close was just to lay out all the witnesses we had in this case and help the jury understand that by the time we got to closing arguments, the defendant's story was impossible, and they would have to endorse an impossible story to justify, someone that was highly revered in this city being shot in the back 7 times. So, I mean, as far as what I focused on in my closing argument, I was simply just focused on the evidence as much as I could. And I know Mr. Fuller talked a lot about, us trying to distract from the case, but I really feel that those distractions were brought by him. He brought from the very beginning these allegations against Billy Sarabello, and we had no choice but to go into this courtroom and address them, because until the day we walked in for jury selection, they had never been addressed by anyone. It had just been floated out there that this man had done this horrible thing, committed a federal offense, and we certainly went into this trial intending to not only prove our case, but disprove the allegations made by Mr. Fuller, because we felt we had to do that in order to assure the jury that they were doing the proper thing and putting Mr. Hayes behind bars.
Want to respond?
And I, as the person who does the rebuttal argument, I knew following after a 4-hour closing argument, I was not going to have many people's attention for a long time. That being said, having been here for a while, I typically go about an hour or so anyway, so I knew that I had to accomplish something quickly, and we had to get to the facts rather quickly. We thought that the physical evidence was speaking volumes, and if we could get that articulated to the jury in a simple enough way for them to understand that we had a shot getting justice for Raquel Smith. I can tell you that we felt the emotion in there behind us. As being someone who wouldn't necessarily be able to name the players who were sitting behind us, I felt their emotion behind me to a great deal. One of the first days we get to the office, we had no idea the amount of support that would show up at the office for us. And I told Jason when we get to court, I went over there and I introduced myself, and we had people staring at us, very intensely, sort of checking us out. Would they be good enough? Would they be able to get the job done? And I feel like I'll never forget when I said to everyone, all right, well, I'm going to head over with everything. Are you all ready? And one of the players, and at this time I still don't even know which one it was, just looked at me and very serious goes, are you ready? And I have never felt like I could not let somebody down so much in my life. I felt that emotion going up there. I knew I had a short period of time to try to round the jury back up, get them focused on the facts, get the distractions out of the way, and try to tell this jury this was simple if they just paid attention to the physical evidence. So that is also something that we prepare days in advance. Jason and I, as well as Tiffany, are on the phone, late hours, 3 a.m., trying to figure out how should we articulate something in the simplest and most effective way possible. So this is something we put a lot of thought into, and we were sort of ready to go.
John? You talked just now about provocation being an element of the manslaughter count. You talked a lot to the jury about how this is unacceptable in terms of how you handle a traffic collision, a traffic accident. Can you talk about the role of Richard Hernandez and how you think it might have played into the jury's decision?
I think we knew going in, and it was obvious in the trial, that people were not going to like the actions of Richard Hernandez. We never tried to hide that. We called him as a witness to take the stand and tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury exactly what he did, which is what the lay witnesses saw. In first reading it, people described the shirtless male as being aggressive. That's what we saw on paper when we started to take this case. Then we started to meet with people, and it almost seemed as if he was aggressive in a ridiculous way, not necessarily aggressive in a life-threatening way. And we know that that's true because Kevin O'Neill says he runs away because he was scared in the first place. Richard Hernandez, Mr. Cacioppo describes best when he says Richard Hernandez wasn't going in. He was just acting. He was all talk, essentially. And we get that from Cardell Hayes when he takes the stand as well. He says Richard Hernandez was long gone at the time that when he claims he hears a shot, which we know he shoots the first shot, but he himself, along with his passenger, both admit that Richard Hernandez doesn't present any life-threatening force. Now, that being said, we knew he may have escalated emotion out there that night or caused some sort of chaos, which also, again, goes to our understanding of the jury's verdict of manslaughter. We did not think it was provocation sufficient to deprive an average person of their calm and cool reflection, but in this case we certainly understand how they factored in his actions in what the judge would describe to them in the instructions as the chaos or uncertainty of the situation. So we knew we were going to have to deal with the actions of Richard Hernandez as being what we would best describe as ridiculous. However, we thought not a factor in determining why Cardell Hayes pulled a gun and murdered Will Smith.
Ken?
Two-part question. Have any of you been able to hear from any jurors to hear what their reasoning was on the verdict? And secondly, do you feel you would have gotten the same verdict had Cardell Hayes not taken the stand?
Have you heard from any jurors?
We have not. We have not spoken to any jurors since the incident. I felt maybe we need to give them a minute. It's been days and days and long nights. It might be somewhat...
It's not appropriate for us to reach out to them. If they want to contact the office, sometimes jurors will do that. They may contact the office and indicate that they'd like to talk to us or talk to the attorneys about the case, and we can certainly do that, but it would not be appropriate for us to reach out to them.
As far as Cardell Hayes, I think that I don't know that it would have made much difference. I have to believe that nobody on that jury believed the version of events that he put forward. And this is something we talked about while the jury was deliberating for those hours. We did not believe that they thought that bullets were boomeranging, gun was going off uncontrollably, and that he was standing at that angle. That was ridiculous. However, we still thought the jury was going to factor in the possibility of provocation, the excitement of what was going on out there, having not believed anything Cardell Hayes said. That was one of our arguments. If you believe he's lying, why does he need to lie? So that was how we presented it, but I do not know whether it would have made a difference had he not testified, because we did not think that any of the jurors would have reasonably believed that those facts were true. But we can certainly understand how, given all of the other testimony, they would have seen a possible provocation or chaos essentially going on out there.
Any more questions?
One last question. You discussed the hurdles you had to overcome to get a murder verdict. With those things, the aggressiveness or reported aggressiveness of Will Smith and maybe the BAC level, might that be a mitigating factor in sentencing, or that be something you'll have to overcome?
Well, again, that is the mitigation has been taken into account by the jury. The jury has already said, we do not think this is second-degree murder, which would carry a mandatory life sentence. So we have given you some consideration by finding you guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. Now, the judge, it is in her discretion, and we have, to some extent, taken away that discretion by filing that firearm enhancement enhancement provision by showing that the death was caused by a gun. So she will have to impose a sentence of at least 20 years. I think the issue is going to be, the big question is going to be whether or not she imposes a sentence, if she is of a mind to impose a sentence of greater than 40 years, she is going to have to run the manslaughter and the attempt manslaughter consecutive. I certainly think there is a basis in the facts of this proceeding for the judge to do that. I also think you have to take into account the case of the defendant. You have to consider the defendant. You consider his testimony on the stand. Did he get on the stand and intentionally lie? Did he try to make a mockery of the system? Is he trying to sort of cause a travesty of justice? Those are things I think the judge has the right to take into account in determining what is the appropriate sentence. As I've indicated, we are going to put victim impact on to demonstrate how the Smith family and others have been severely impacted and affected by Will's death, but we're also going to talk about the defendant, and I think that we're hopeful that the judge will see it to impose a sentence of 60 years.